It fell about the Lammas tide. That's the early part of August, when the hay's being got in. High summer, high season. I, with my lord, Sir Harry Percy, whom the Scots had called Hotspur, lay at Newcastle with our power. It was a very uneasy summer, for as thunder crackled in the heavens, we knew that thunder would soon be rumbling on earth. We had word, we had intelligence, that the Scots, ever impious and daring, were about to launch yet another invasion. You'd think they'd learn, wouldn't you, all the defeats they'd had? But we knew their commander was the most wily of men, George Dunbar, the Earl of March and Dunbar. He, like Bertrand du Guesclin of the Borders, had pushed our English tide of conquest back these last 30 years and more. And yet, my young lord, Harry Percy, but 23 years of age, had fought and striven against these Scots and pushed them back in many a foray, and they knew he was no young man to be trifled with. No more his father, the great Earl, Henry Percy, 1st Earl of Northumberland, chosen representative of King Richard II on the Borders. Not that the king himself showed any interest. So we waited, and we held our force, we held our breath, and kept our power central at Newcastle. Why, we had knights and gentry from all across the shire, and the trained bands of the town itself. We could perhaps number 7,000 to 8,000 all told, mounted on sturdy hobblers. But where were the enemy? And then, when the summer storm broke, so they came, storming south, down across the border, bringing fire and sword, rape, pillage, destruction, their normal tools with them. Moving fast, very fast. We had word their numbers were 30,000 strong and more, far too many for us to take on, even with our longbows. They made it down as far as Durham. We had no word or sight of them. Our scouts could barely track them, so fast did these hobblers move. Now these we had border horse, no great chain of supply wagons, no ponies burdened with tents and pack equipment and cooking utensils and grand pavilions for the gentry. No, these men and women rode fast and fought fast and struck fast. We heard news they had reached as far as Durham. You could see the fires burning in the dusk. And then they began to retreat, coming back past us at Newcastle, driving in front of them like some biblical scene, having emptied every byre and every shed in Durham, with their booty on 4 legs pushed before them. That slowed them down, of course. They couldn't move at their normal speed. And then we saw, as we looked out from our battlements, and from the wooden barrier beyond the gate, we saw, why, there was not 30,000 of them. There was barely 1/10 of that number. We had been humbugged. It suddenly came to my Lord Hotspur that the main Scottish attack was not here, it was in the west. These raiders were just sent down the east through Northumberland to tie us down, to keep us fixed in one position whilst they did their worst elsewhere. Now young Harry certainly earned his name Hotspur, sallied out with his knights and exchanged a blow or two with James the Earl of Douglas, second in command of the Scottish army. In the course of this scrimmage, it is said, young Harry actually lost his pennon from the end of his lance. This is rather bad form for a gentleman. And Douglas trumpeted as he rode away that he would fly this in triumph over the great Hotspur from the walls of his castle at Dalkeith. Well, that's something we could not abide. So quick as a flash, young Percy has his men mounted. We are armed and ready. We are big with vengeance, big with fury, to get even with these Scottish ruffians who try to pillage our land. And so, we marched on that hot afternoon, about noon, to reach Otterburn by vespers, perhaps a march of 6 hours. Not impossible if you mounted. But the day was hot, the land was arid and parched, and we could see the line of the Scots army as we marched. Ponteland they had destroyed and taken the castle and a captive for ransom. Camber they had destroyed and taken other prisoners. And they were heading on their way, we knew, to Otterburn, where the Umphravers held the great tower there. And they might yet be able to hold the Scots. Hold them there whilst we caught up. We knew, as Sir Henry told me, that surprise and speed would be our weapons. The Scots would not expect us to mobilise and pursue them with the speed and vigour that we did. And so, as the summer shadows began to lengthen, as the light shone down on the ancient moat hills at Elsdon, we came to Elsdon and began our approach, just a couple of leagues, on towards Otterburn. We knew the Scots were there. We knew they were ahead of us somewhere, but they screened their camp well. They were very good at it. We knew that the Scots had made various forays and sallies against the tower at Otterburn, but could make no headway. The Umphrevilles held fast, and their camp had to be somewhere north of the town itself, along the long, winding course of the River Reed, because they need the water to feed and to water their cattle and their horses, all of which is stolen. So, we began to advance with great care. We knew now that we had the advantage of in numbers, but my Lord Hotspur had a choice to make. He says to me, John Hardyng, well, should I attack now, or should we make camp and wait till the morning, till the light favours us? Because if we attack in the dusk, if we have to find them and they do not come to us, we will not be able to use our longbows. Now this was an important matter. Every battle we had ever won against the Scots, from the days of Longshank onwards, had largely been won by our English longbows. The Scots, with their long spears and padded jacks, had no answer for our cloth-yard storm. We had shot them down day upon day, field upon field. They had died in large numbers, satisfyingly large numbers, whilst we lost few. But if we made camp, March, who'd weigh the odds very carefully, would use the darkness to decamp. He'd move all of his booty, all of his stolen animals. He'd move north and head up towards that uphill climb toward the border, and once they were lost in the upper regions of the Reed, we'd never find them. There would be no battle. We'd have no revenge, and Douglas might yet fly young Percy's pennon from the walls of his castle at Dalkeith. Time would tell. So, Hotspur had a decision to make. Now, history will tell you, if a commander fails, he's impetuous. If he succeeds, well, he's gifted. But the line between that success and that failure, that fine judgment, which he must make in a matter of seconds or minutes at the most, it can be very, very close. And indeed, that night, it was very, very close indeed.
Rosemary. That's for remembrance. There's some happy memories from round here. This is actually my neck of the woods originally. I was from this side of the border. I married into a Scots family many years ago, longer than I'd like to think about. It's always feels a conflict of loyalties when things start going off between the Scots and the English, because there's people I care about on both sides. But my marriage did solve a blood feud that had been going on for 3 generations. So here I am in the Scottish camp. Women have, we women do have an important role in all this. People always do seem to think that all this, it's all very adventure. You know, it's all a boys' playground. And women are, women are quite important. Firstly, who's going to feed them? They might go off raiding and bring a couple of cows or a couple of sheep back. Who ends up cooking them? Yep. It'll be me and the girls. Who keeps the swords clean? Me and the girls. Makes the food. We've got porridge at the moment. Got some porridge. See, oats are nice and easy to keep stashed in the saddlebags. And milk you just pick up on the way. Cows, they're everywhere. Well, pottage is another one. Don't confuse your pottage with your porridge, mind. Pottage is meat and vegetables. That's about as close as you can call it, meat and vegetables. It's whatever happened on gets thrown in the pot. Some days it can be meat, some days it can be more vegetables. Depends what's in the fields as we're passing. So yeah, some days it's more nutritious than others. But the one that women are often forgotten about is in a battle, which there's many skirmishes. I have a feeling that there's something in the offing at the moment. But we're generally regarded as non-combatants. I can use a sword. I mean, everybody can use a sword, but we're non-combatants in the fighting. So a man in armour can't last very long before he needs water. There's men that will just drop dead of exhaustion and dehydration So one of our roles is to get onto the battlefield as water carriers and to give the men water, just from our own sides, of course. And then we've also, the other role is that we've got to get men off the battlefield if they're wounded. Now, there's only so much you can do. There's other women amongst us that have knowledge of different herbs, different healing that they can use to repair a man that looks like he's dying. I've seen some absolutely amazing turnarounds. But if you get infection in a wound, that's it. If you're lucky, you can cut off a limb above the point of infection and save the man's life, but he's a cripple for life. I'm a seamstress, so I do love to, I like to make gowns for myself and for my family, but that gets pressed into use in situations like this, when sometimes a man will be brought off the battlefield and I have to stitch his wounds up once the other girls have cleaned them out. So yeah, we do have, we can do more than I think. I think is often realised. You can use honey on there. Once it's all been cleaned out, I'll sometimes put a little bit of honey on there, which can stop it getting infected. Sometimes cobwebs, which will actually bind the wound, and then I'll use thin silk, or if it's quite a fine cut, sometimes I'll use hair and stitch it closed. So yeah, if we can get a man off the battlefield within a few minutes of being wounded, there's a chance that we can save him. If we can't, that's when the women come in again. When the men are exhausted from battle, maybe recovering from wounds, or just having a meal and trying to rest, that's when we have to get out and deal with the dead and the dying. Sometimes that you may have to dispatch a man who's suffering, who has no chance of recovery. We'll have daggers with that. Wouldn't like to think how many times I've had to cut a throat for mercy. And of course you have to rob the dead as well. I say rob the dead, they have no further use of it. Anything that can be used will. Shoes, they're quite expensive. Clothes, weapons. You're not going to leave a sword. I mean, my husband would love another sword like that. You take everything you can, and when the dead are stripped naked, you can't tell who was on what side. It's rather sad, really. And we dig a pit in the consecrated ground, and the dead are buried. Sometimes all together, because you don't know who's who. I mean, we know that they're good Christians, so there's always some words said. They're buried with respect and with honour, but they're all dead, aren't they?
I, Sir John Swinton, declare to thee that we the Scots are well prepared. We ha' a lower camp by Greenchesters with all the livestock. They say the livestock was by us taken, pilfered, robbed. We say liberated. And now our livestock. And we are near the River Reed for water. Our higher camp, further up the hill, contains our men-at-arms, brave men, brave Scots, brave of heart and full of fight. We the Scots, we drill as must armies do, and we have planned a bold counterattack if we ourselves are attacked. We the Scots have been surprised by the speed of the English advance from Newcastle. It was around Vespers on the 5th of August this day. Say 3 hours daylight left. Will the English attack this evening?
So it was. Harry Hotspur. Well, he earned his name that night. He decided he'd split his force in two. He set one column off with the Ogle and Redmayne to march along the side of the river on this north flank and attack what appeared to be the Scottish camp. This lay down by the river. It made sense. Ready water supply, good grazing, by a farm called Greenchester's. The ground climbed away from Greenchester's, climbed away to the north, and we couldn't see, and our scouts could get no closer, as to what lay beyond the top of that small ridge. We had an inkling the Scots would have their main camp up there, where the knights and men-at-arms would be based, and that if we all barreled in toward the camp, then they would follow upon our flank and destroy us. So Hotspur holds his division, the best part of it, in reserve. Now, you must imagine, we had ridden all those long, hot hours up from Newcastle, and 8,000 men strung along a road, well, that's a column 10 or 12 miles in length, if you allow for stragglers. It was Vespers. If we do not strike soon, well, then the light would no longer favour us, and the Scots might yet slip away. So, even as we dismounted, even as we formed up into our companies, much of our power was yet still strung out upon the road. But Hotspur took the view it was worth attacking with inferior numbers, just to make sure our Scottish friends did not escape unscathed. So, we stood and we watched as Ogle and Redmayne and their men marched in good order toward the Scottish camp, broke into past the abattis, past the defences work, and we could see a fierce fight going on. At some point, as we know, March sent men down from the upper camp to caretake the lower camp, to maintain the defence. But eventually, Ogle and Redmayne broke through, slaughtered the women and the varlets who were looking after the stolen cattle, and pursued the rest north. The rest north, up the valley of the River Reed, across Siloans, and halfway to Scotland, 5 full miles now. That's all very well, but it meant that whole division, out of our left flank, was lost to us. We on the right were now iced as we moved cautiously toward what we thought was this higher ground. There are times when a Hotspur is a disadvantage. This was one of them. Had he been facing other opponents other than March, well then things might have gone better. But Dunbar was a wily man, canny fighter, many years of experience. He'd rehearsed, he'd already drilled his men in what to do if they were attacked. He might not expect an attack, but he was ready for it. And what he planned was to send Douglas's force down a shallow re-entrant to actually outflank us. They would take us upon our right flank. We couldn't see them. Although they were close, the ground was hidden from us by the natural fall of the hill, and of course by the woodland and scrub which screened them so nicely. So as we moved forward, they moved around our flank, and then suddenly they smashed into us from cover. Scottish spears levelled and charging. Now, a lumberman might dispose of Scottish spears, but hand to hand it's another matter. And so we laid on, right lusty in the evening light. We fought, they fought, and long and hard was the battle fought. I've heard chroniclers say that this was a battle as well fought, as hard fought as any they ever wrote about. Now you think of it, well, I could certainly attest that. It was buckler and sword against spear and axe, bills against long spears with their sharp points. And our bills did good work, but their spears did good work as well. And the fight hung, as it seemed, in the balance. But that was when Douglas mustered his men for a second attack. He kept full company, perhaps two, we're not sure, in reserve, and launched them just at the critical moment when perhaps our own resolution was beginning just to waver a little bit. Bloody harlots!
Come on.
Traitor!
Bring it on!
I'll block with a blade.
Oh, what bold and excellent counter-attack by we the Scots! How most excellently we used dead ground to approach and strike at the right flank of Percy's division. How the fight raged into the dusk, and how, to break the stalemate, our hero leader Douglas committed his final reserve. Douglas had sallied out without his full harness and helmet. He was cut down, and he died. So I, Swinton, commanding Douglas's long trust in me, led the survivors in a final push, breaking the English line. Die, Hardyng, die! Douglas swore a solemn oath, and thus enraged did say, "Ere thus I will outbrave by one of us, two shall die. I know thee well, an earl thou art, Lord Percy, so am I." The English archers bent their bows, their hearts were good and true. At the first flight of arrows sent full score Scots they slew. At last these two stout earls did meet like captains of great might. Like lions would they laid on load and made a cruel fight. They fought until they both did sweat with swords of tempered steel, until the blood like drops of rain they trickling down did feel. "O yield thee, Percy," Douglas said, "in faith I will thee bring, where thou shalt high advanced be by James, our Scottish king. Thy ransom I will freely give, and this report of thee, thou art the most courageous knight that ever I did see." "No, Douglas," quoth Earl Percy then, "thy prefers I do scorn. I will not yield to any Scot that ever yet was born." With that there came an arrow keen out of a English bow, which struck Earl Douglas to the heart, a deep and deadly blow. "Who never spake more words than these? Fight on, my merry men all, for why, my life is at an end. Lord Percy sees my fall." Then leaving life, Earl Percy took the dead man by the hand and said, "Earl Douglas, for thy life would I had lost my land. O Christ, my very heart doth bleed with sorrow for thy sake. For sure a more doubted knight mischance could never take." A knight among the Scots there was, who saw Earl Douglas die, who straight in wrath did vow revenge upon Lord Percy. Sir Hugh Montgomery was he called, who with a spear full bright, well mounted on a gallant steed, ran fiercely through the fight, and past the English archers all, without all dread or fear, and through Earl Percy's body then he thrust his hateful spear. This fight did last from break of day till setting of the sun, for when they rung the evening bell, the battle scarce was done. And the Lord Maxwell in like case did with Earl Douglas die. Of 200 Scottish spears scarce 55 did fly. Of 1,500 Englishmen went home but 53. The rest were slain in cherry chase under the greenwood tree. Next day did many widows come their husbands to bewail. They washed their wounds in brinish tears, but all would not prevail. Their bodies bathed in purple gore, they bore with them away. They kissed their dead 1,000 times when they were clad in clay. God save our King, and bless this land with plenty, joy and peace, and grant henceforth that foul debate twixt noblemen may cease.